I'm speaking today with Mr. Luis Alberto Moreno, the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, a bank that will be dispersing about $15 billion in this year alone. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Mr. Moreno. How would we identify the priorities that you've set for yourself in terms of what needs to be dispersed this year and the priorities for Latin America in general?
Well, first of all, let's understand what a development bank is. We're a regional development bank for Latin America, like the Asia Development Bank is for Asia. Our role, of course, is basically around development financing. Largely, the bulk of our lending goes to sovereigns, to governments. And because our unique circumstance where we are our shareholders, in the case of the IDB, there are 48. 3 of them are from Asia: Japan, Korea,
and now China.
Yeah. We enjoy a AAA rating status. We basically lend for social programs and for poverty alleviation, and increasingly for infrastructure. And we also do things around small and medium enterprises, which are at the core of employment generation in Latin America. In fact, it is small and medium enterprises that represent close to 60% of total employment in Latin America. Having said that, basically the focus of what we have been doing this year during the crisis is really to step up our lending, to be as countercyclical as possible, because it is development institutions that really have come at a time that was critical as financial markets dried up, and it was very difficult, that it has been difficult for some countries to get access to financing. So that is that gap that we fill, not only for sovereign lending, but also for non-sovereign lending.
How would you describe your role vis-a-vis the commercial lending sector in Latin America? I think that development banks in general have this interesting challenge, because the more commercial a country becomes, the less it would theoretically have a need for developmental funding. I guess that during the crisis, your role was accentuated somewhat. But how would you describe this juxtaposition with domestic markets in developing countries in Latin America?
Well, certainly, if there are commercial banks lending to conventional sovereigns or non-sovereign, there's really development banks shouldn't be participating. But that as in a general principle. But development needs things that truly impact the lives of people, that can significantly reduce competitiveness gaps or improve the quality of life of people through programs on education, programs on social safety nets. Those are exactly the natural things for a development bank to lend to. Increasingly, the new challenges are things like climate change. This is one of the areas where all development banks are extremely concentrated, for obvious reasons. I mean, we feel a gap that doesn't exist in areas of energy efficiency, in areas of adaptation of carbon credits or support of green energy. And finally, we are basically knowledge institutions. We basically strive to share best practices throughout the
So it's not just the capital that you bring in, but also
the capital is just a piece of something larger.
Right. Having said that, you're trying to raise, under the 9th recap program, a sum that goes way beyond what the IDB has been running on all these years. And there's criticism that the $180 billion that you're trying to raise is somewhat dangerous, because it sort of puts you in scrutiny in terms of how you're going to be deploying that funds and all of that.
Well, look, first of all, we are in the midst of the discussion of a capital increase. That number was a group of experts that individually recommended that number to our shareholders, to our board of governors. We have done some demand analysis that has a low range scenario and a high range scenario that would support an increase of about 100% and not 180%.
Right.
And that those are the ranges. Having said that, that needs necessarily to have a negotiation. We're in a trajectory to finish this process, as has been agreed in the last meeting of our governors, by our next annual meeting, which will be held in Cancun, Mexico, in March of next year.
Okay.
We will know then what will be the final number. But what is critical, however, is to understand that development needs in Latin America are growing, that we are still not entirely out of the woods, that financial institutions are still weak,
Right.
and therefore the need to have strong development banks to be precisely ready to come and support all of development, those
Right.
development needs.
The criticism seems to be on IDB's internal capability to manage an increase of that magnitude, and also the processes you have in place to measure the results of your current investments and how they've been achieving the goals that they set out to do. What's being done internally to strengthen the institution to be relevant?
First of all, I do believe that we have the capability to do more lending. In fact, the best example is that historically our average lending was about 7.5 billion. We're doubling it this year. We did it with the exact same amount of staff. So we've demonstrated that we can do it. That does not mean that we can do things better. In fact, we have a whole agenda of improvements, as every institution needs, any financial institution needs to do on improving risk management, on management for development results. That's something that we put in place over a year ago, but these things take time to really get and demonstrate their effectiveness. And we will continue to do all of these things, and they're fundamental for any institution, that level of change and of really having a better bank.
And the countries that you're lending into in Latin America, the national balance sheet of the countries that you're lending to, how's that progressing? What are you seeing taking place in terms of external borrowings and the stability of the currencies of the respective countries that are your borrowers in that sense?
Well, look, Latin America is in a very unique and different position than it was in the past. Think for a minute that for the many financial crises that occurred, many actually did originate in Latin America. This one did not originate in Latin America, much the contrary. Perhaps one could argue that many Latin American countries were the last ones to to get the impact and the effects of the financial crisis, and they were probably the first ones to get out and start to rebound. So that's new, and that's new partly because countries were with larger domestic markets, with better fiscal balances, and on the whole with fiscal balances, with debt to GDP ratios that are significantly lower than they were in the past, about 25%
Right.